Joining us this morning, Titania Georgia.
Tatiana Jordan. Did I get the name right?
Titania.
Titania. Okay. All right.
It's Titania Jordan. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I am here today with Chris Clark, CEO and President of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce.
Thanks for having me today.
So, kind of a big deal. Just going to put that out there. Let's just start with your day today. What has your day entailed?
So today we started early this morning, get to the office around 7 o'clock. Spend some time catching up on, the basics, right? Mm-hmm. Email like anybody else does. But we're spending a lot of time right now working on our efforts to help grow rural Georgia. And so we spent most of the morning looking at data, working on different projects for those efforts. I'm here with you now for a couple of hours, so nice reprieve. And then I'm back for 2 hours with a meeting on lawsuit reform, how we make it easier for and more fair for Georgia businesses in our court systems. Some other meetings after that I'm really not sure about right now. And then the most important thing of the day is to be home in time to take my 11-year-old to soccer practice tonight. So that's the goal tonight, is to get home by 7 to get him to soccer practice.
I am right there with you.
It's nice though, this week is unusual. I think in June I was in the office 2 days, July I was in the office 6 days, this month I'm in the office I think 12 days. And so this is my one full week in the office for the month. So we load up and do lots and lots and lots of meetings.
Right there with you. Chris and I both have an only child, and I think that's a fun commonality.
It is.
And you are from the state of Georgia.
Yes, ma'am.
From Fitzgerald?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me about Fitzgerald.
So Fitzgerald is an interesting community. It was actually founded after the Civil War by a newspaper editor from Indiana. And he had this vision that soldiers from the North and the South ought to live together as a way to heal the country after that. And so he bought this property in South Georgia that he had never seen before. I don't know where he bought it from. He didn't get it online, obviously, but so he moved to town and he laid out the town. It was the first planned city in Georgia. And so all the streets from one north to south or east to west, and they are named, if you go the north to south streets, they're named for southern and northern generals alternating. And then the other direction, they're named for southern and northern indigenous trees going the other way. And so he gave free land to all of these northern retirees from the war so that they could come and homestead. Wow. And built this little railroad community that is a great, your typical South Georgia small town, wonderful place to grow up, but it's really an interesting history. And so you grew up having people from up north, descendants of people from up north and people that had been there since forever, like our family had been. It was just a neat, neat little town. It's called the Blue-Gray City, and have the Blue-Gray Museum and those kind of things. So it's neat. It really gives you a good sense of history, but I think a balanced sense of history too,
right,
as opposed to what you might get if you grew up north or in the South in different atmosphere. So
and diversity.
Great little town, and diversity too. So great little town. My parents still live there, and my great uncle is still there, and my other uncles are there. So we go back quite a bit.
I love that. Yeah, when I was stalking you online to get prepped for today, I saw that, and I didn't have any idea about that special aspect to it.
Fitzgerald is a very small town, but it's been interesting to me throughout my career, whether it's at college or grad school or anywhere else. Somebody always knew someone from Fitzgerald. It had such a good political kind of hub for a long time, and it was quite an industrial magnet for a while. And it's interesting. I think that's where I got my interest, quite frankly, in economic development, because in the 1980s we were one of the few South Georgia towns to recruit new industry. And we were in the Wall Street Journal. I remember talking about it in school, how proud we were that our little town was featured in the Wall Street Journal, and such a big deal. And so you kind of looked up to the guy that ran the chamber and the mayor and the guy that ran economic development, that these were heroes of the community, and they were helping our parents because they were getting jobs and they were helping our community be better. And it was, kind of introduced you to this idea of civic engagement and economic development when most kids you don't know what that is, you don't know what the chamber does. Yeah. But in our little town, you really knew they were the champions, and we were very proud of them. And so that kind of was my first introduction to the field.
I love it. So that's how the seed was planted. That's how you were drawn to making high impact decisions in your career. And
to be a servant leader. I mean, that's what I was taught from, my dad was in the military and his dad was in the military, my uncle was in the military, and so you want to serve others, and then you grow up in this town where they kind of embed that in you, that we're serving each other, and it's this real community. It's almost like Andy Griffith. I'd ride my bicycle into town, and you can't do that anymore, right? We don't get to do that. But that was just a kind of a great way to grow up and know your community and know the people around you.
That's so special. That's really, really cool. I wish our children could experience that. So how did you get to be the CEO and president of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce?
So after grad school, I went and ran a little chamber in a little town called Hawkinsville, and then from there I ran the Development Authority in Fayette County, which is Peachtree City, Fayetteville here in Atlanta. And then Governor Perdue, when he was elected, asked me to come work for him, and so I was Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Economic Development for 4 years, and I went and ran the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority, and then ran the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. And so I got asked one night at this party. There was actually a reception. I negotiated the Kia deal. Fast forward a few years, we had some reception celebrating Kia's anniversary, and a couple of CEOs said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming to the Georgia Chamber?" And I said, "I would. It's always been something I've thought about, but I figured when I was much, much older, maybe I'd get that opportunity." And I think it was the combination of being from South Georgia, understanding rural issues, understanding Atlanta issues, having this portfolio of doing economic development and environmental work that kind of attracted maybe them to come and ask me if I was interested in it. And then it took about 6 months or so to get to that point. But after a lot of prayer, talking to mentors, I think what struck me about the chamber was it was an opportunity to do the things that I really love to do, but on a bigger scale, and to continue to have an impact on the whole state, and to help parts of the state that needed that help, like South Georgia, but to be part of the decision making and what's going to happen in Atlanta, which is our economic engine, of course, instead of maybe being at a state agency where it's just one issue that you get to work on, or going back to the local level where you're just helping that community. And so that was what was attractive to me about the opportunity. And to come to an organization that's 100 years old and has the history that the chamber has was really an honor, and I've been there now 7 years.
Wow.
So
that's awesome.
Seems like yesterday, but it's been 7 years now. My mom's happy that I've actually held a job for more than a couple of years.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah, so see, she always asks too. She's like, "You gonna stay, right?" And I was like, "I'm happy. I'm good. I found the right thing." So yeah, no more job hopping.
Good. Well, we are glad that you're in that seat. What are some of your major initiatives for the last half of this year? Can you believe we're already halfway through?
It is. It's surprising how quickly we run through the year. And so for us at the Chamber, so a couple of different things. One, we're gearing up for an election season, right? So 2018 is going to see the largest changeover of elected leaders in Georgia in a generation.
Wow.
You have over 20 to 30 open House and Senate seats. You're going to have a new governor, a new lieutenant governor, a new secretary of state, a new insurance commissioner. And so we want to make sure as the business community that we're influencing that debate. And so we'll be working hard as we go through the rest of this year to meet with those candidates and to tell them what are the issues we think are important to continue to grow jobs in Georgia and continue to be the best place to do business. And so that's a big part of what we're focused on. But the other is we've really doubled down on our belief in rural Georgia. The state of Georgia continues to grow, right? Best place to do business. We're going to add 1.5 million people over the next 12 years to Georgia, which means 1 million more cars on the road, which means 134,000 more takeoffs and landings at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. It means 75% more truck traffic on the road coming out of our ports, which all that's great from an economic standpoint. But at the same time, we have 74 counties in Georgia that will lose population. We have over 100 counties that will lose millennial workforce. And so most of those are those rural communities. And so they've not kept pace with the rest of Georgia. They've not kept pace. And so earlier this year, we opened our first regional office in 100 years, opened in Tifton, Georgia. It's our Center for Rural Prosperity. We have committees working on those issues. We're working with the Georgia House of Representatives and the Georgia Senate on it. But we want to give strategies and help those rural communities that want to grow, that have opportunities to grow. We want to help the Fitzgeralds of the world continue to prosper. And we've seen so many rural communities throughout this country that have faltered and failed as companies have moved off, as we've had the rural brain drain. But we've got another thing that's happening in Georgia. We have this gray tsunami. We have all these baby boomers that are retiring. We're going to have 1 million retirees in the next 6 years in Georgia.
Wow.
As people, they move to their lake house. Yeah. So who are going to fill those jobs? And in those rural communities, if those HR directors can't find the people to take those jobs, they're going to move. And so we're working double time and trying to coordinate the efforts and work, not just in Georgia, but in other states as well, to have a new focus on rural Georgia, rural America, and how we help them, how we focus on their strengths, agriculture, defense industry, manufacturing, and how we bring those jobs back. And so those things fill up a lot of our time, and they're all hand in hand, right? Helping those communities is important to the next governor to say this is a priority and we want to give them strategies about how to do that. And so that's how we'll spend the rest of this year and all of next year, is focused on the election cycle, rural Georgia, and the other things that we need to do to make sure that Georgia's brand in Atlanta continues to stay positive. I mean, as great as Atlanta is going, we've got issues in Atlanta too, right? So if we don't address transit and transportation, we're going to cripple ourselves long term. Yeah. We're also seeing an interesting thing happen between Atlanta and the suburbs right now. We've seen a 66% growth in poverty in the suburbs as people in Atlanta are priced out with gentrification and other things, are priced out of the market, then they move into the suburbs, which changes the dynamic in our suburbs. It changes your dynamic in your schools and your healthcare systems. And so what are those solutions? How do we get communities to work on those types of issues too? And so, I think a lot of times people think the chamber, we're the boosters, and we're proud of Georgia, but we also know we have to address these issues if we want to continue to grow and continue to be a good place to live, work, play, and pray for Jackson, your son, and for my son as they grow up.
This is fascinating. So many questions. As you're speaking, I'm like, remember to ask him this, remember to ask him this. It's just, this time with you is awesome. One thing I would like to ask is, for everybody out there watching, in the internet world and YouTube land, especially Georgia residents, what can we do right now to help you with any of those initiatives, especially the rural one?
I think the big thing is to engage with your local chambers, with the state chamber, be a member, show up, say how do we help? Because every community is different, right? Wherever you live out there, your community is going to have different things that they're working on. I love the fact up in Hall County, you've got the Development Authority working with United Way to try to eradicate poverty. Wow. Now that's bringing the business community together with the nonprofit sector, bringing the faith community to the table too. So there's different strategies all the way around, but the only way that we're going to address these issues is if the business community and the private sector steps up. I think a lot of times business leaders tend to think, well, those are issues that government deals with, right? Yeah. Let the government or let the do-good groups go deal with those issues. And that a little bit of a soapbox, I try to preach this a lot to our communities out there, that leadership model doesn't work anymore. The idea that a small group of let's face it, old white guys can fix everything in your community doesn't work anymore. You have to have an inclusive leadership model that brings the faith-based community to the table, that brings young people to the table, that brings the civic clubs, and bring your universities to the table.
And women.
What a novel idea that we would bring women to the table. But if you don't have that inclusiveness, then your community's not going to be successful. Your Rotary clubs that still don't allow women, not going to be successful long term. And I'm joking, I'm a member of the Rotary Club, they all allow women. So that's an old stereotype. But this idea that business can solve it, or just government, or just this group, those models don't work. We have to be more diverse. We have to engage people. This new generation that's coming online now, we talk about the millennials, we're starting to talk about the Zers, right? That's what our sons are, and that's going to be a whole different deal that we're going to have to deal with. And the hardest thing for a lot of communities to understand is that in order for them to be successful in the long term, they have to be a place where young people want to live, work, play, and pray. which means they have to change things. You know, they don't want 3 acres in the suburbs necessarily. They want different things.
Minimalism.
Right. It's different from us. And I was in a community the other day, and their struggle was finding housing for young workers, because young workers don't want the big houses. And that's what all the zoning says. They want these smaller houses, little you know, tiny house, right? Yeah. We all have to watch tiny houses, one of our favorite shows. But it's different. So you have to think about, what are those workers that we want to attract to our community? What do they want? Yeah. And then how do we deliver it to them? You know, I was in a very small community. I said, you know what, guys, these young people that you're trying to attract, they want a brew pub. And all of a sudden everybody got all upset. Well, you know, we don't allow alcohol in our community. It's like, that's the kind of thing maybe you need to think about, that you have to think differently. And it's not about you or your morals or your standards or what your parents, you're different than your parents, your kids are different than you. That's hard for people to grasp. But I do think if you can hear from the business community, if those business leaders can get engaged, can run for office, can have those conversations, and that helps move the needle. Yeah, well, I mean, gosh, everything you're saying is spawning, again, more and more questions and sidebars, but it's like, you know, if you're growing up in a very strict household where there is no gambling, and then you hear about the Georgia lottery, and hey, that's how my college education was actually paid for, it's like, ooh, where do you draw the line? And it changes, very uncomfortable for people. Yep. So, and also a funny note about our son and our sons and their generation. Last night, Jackson was talking about texting to somebody, and he was like, Mom, can you just, you know, install that thing where I press the button and I text? I talk to text. I don't want to have to type. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I'm wondering, on one hand, is he lazy? Like, you know, I was shoveling horse, you know what, in a barn when I was his age, and now he doesn't want to type. But on the same hand, like, that's his world. Right. So what do you do? Yeah, and how are they getting content? And you know, I have this argument with educators a lot. My son still goes to the same classroom style setting that I went to 100 years ago, and he doesn't learn the same way that I learned. And so why don't we give kids different opportunities? If you go to other countries, you might pull up to the front door and drop off your 3 kids, and one of them's going to go to a traditional class, one to a cyber academy, and one to Montessori, all in the same place. Why can't we do that? Because kids are learning very, very differently. We have to give them the tools. We need to make sure, though, that they have soft skills. And I think that's what we see from a business standpoint that we struggle with, and we talk with our son a lot about, you know, being polite, knowing how to dress, show up on time, you make a commitment, you're there. When I talk to HR directors and plant managers all over Georgia, that's their biggest issue, is that people don't have the soft skills. They come in for an interview in flip-flops or you know, shorts. None of that's going to work in the business world. And I think that's for us, that's my job as a parent, to make sure my son understands, yes, you can use your technology and all, but know how to communicate with people and know how to present yourself. That's a big, big issue for us. We're working on it. We've got a program called Georgia Leads that we're doing with the University of Georgia, and they're actually going into K through 12 schools in Georgia, and we're in 2 communities right now, and they're making sure that every kid starting in kindergarten has soft skills and leadership skills, so that when they do get out in the real world, they'll know how to handle themselves and how to represent themselves well. Totally. You know, being in the world of technology, it's very important to me, but at the same time, I had Jackson in a school that was technology free. And when an adult entered the room, the children stood up. You say, yes, ma'am, and no thank you, and please, and you hold the door and chair. Awesome. There's something to be said for those lifelong skills that have nothing to do with technology or, you know, certain fads that will carry you very far. Absolutely. No, you're spot on. We have our friends send if their kids are coming over, they always tell us the same thing. Make them say yes sir and no sir while they're at your house. But that's how I was raised. Me too. And heaven forbid if I didn't say it. Whew. But you know, if nothing else, my son's going to be polite through the rest of his life. Don't know what else will turn out, but politeness is #1 on the list. But no, it's this mix of technology, the soft skills, communication skills. We spend a lot of time talking about Generation Z, right? And so these are the kids in school now. In Georgia, something like 65% of 3rd graders are not reading at grade level at 3rd grade, 65%. Wow. And that's statewide. And so if those kids aren't getting the basics at that level, are they going to be ready in 8th grade to tackle their math numbers? You know, are they going to be prepared? So how are they going to do all these other things? And so it's really important that parents engage with their kids on the basics like you're talking about, but reading to them. We find that so many parents in Georgia are not reading to their kids. And that was the biggest. Our son is a voracious reader. That's all he wants, or gift cards from Books A Million. It's all he wants to do is read, and that's great, and we encourage that, and it's fantastic. But we read to him from day one, and I think we miss that a lot. And when we see that when parents don't read, their kids are more likely to not read at grade level, they're more likely to become illiterate, they're more likely to have all those other problems and not be productive members of the society. And so helping Georgia adults read, helping kids read on level is another easy thing that mentors can do, that business people, give an hour a month, can go in and make a difference for these kids that when they don't get it at home. And we have businesses all over Georgia that do that every single day, but there's more and more that needs to be done.
Oh my gosh. Well, as you're watching this video, in the description field underneath, we'll have links to all different kinds of places you can, go and give your time and give your support and learn more about all these different initiatives that we're working on. Now, you and I both know what makes Georgia a great place to both live in and work in, but let's reiterate those facts for everybody watching.
So when we're all over the world talking to companies, and we're lucky, right? We get companies moving here from all over the world, and we're blessed with that. The talent in Atlanta is absolutely critical. I mean, when you find companies like Mercedes-Benz and State Farm and others, that why are they here? They're here because of that access to talent. And I give a lot of credit to the Metro Atlanta Chamber and the Gwinnett and Cobb Chambers, and these guys, they've done a great job of marketing the city for millennials all over the world. We need to do that in other parts of Georgia, but they're doing a great job here. But when you've got that, you've got the perfect location, you've got the Port of Savannah, which is the fastest growing port in the country, the Port of Brunswick, which so often gets overlooked. They're the #1 port in the country for vehicles being brought in and sent out of the country, and it's our #1 ag port as well. You add on top of that Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I can get anywhere in the world. We take it for granted.
We do.
But then I talked to my peers from other states, and it took them 4 flights to get to Nashville, and I feel really bad. It took me 30 minutes or an hour from my house to the plane
got chills.
to there. And you're like, I can get anywhere in the world. But companies care about that, and it makes it very easy for the movie industry in Georgia to fly in the folks that they want. That's why South Atlanta will soon have 10 movie studios, because we can move those folks in and out of Hartsfield so quickly. But the other thing too, we did a study. We can talk about how great the climate is, and the mountains and the beaches and all those things, but we actually had an economist a few years ago when Georgia was named the #1 state to do business the first time, and so we asked an economist, said, all right, tell us why. Look behind the scenes. Yes, we've had all these announcements, but tell us what's motivating this. Well, all the things we just said were obvious. But he went back in and he said, you know what, the policies and the leadership at the state level have set a different business climate that companies want to come and be a part of. So when we take away the tax on energy for manufacturers, they want to be here. When we make sure that we've got I saw the numbers the other day, we spend maybe $300 million a year in tax credits for the movie industry, but that gets us $7 billion worth of economic investment in Georgia. So when we have leaders like Governor Deal, Speaker Ralston, Governor Cagle, General Assembly, Republicans and Democrats alike, that understand we need to be a place where people want to come, where they want to create jobs, where it's easy for small businesses to start jobs, where we're going to tackle the tough issues like transportation funding. When businesses see that, they want to be part of it. I met with a company in Ireland last year that's now announcing in Georgia, and they said, it came down to Georgia versus this other state, and this other state passed a bill that was very discriminatory. And we looked at Georgia, and we saw Georgia's governor veto a bill, and saw the business community say, this is the right thing to do, we're open for business. He goes, it was a no-brainer, we came to Georgia. And so those are the types of things I think that the average person out there doesn't see, but it impacts. What government does impacts you every day. And the chamber, we joke all the time, we sit at the intersection of business and government. We spend part of our time explaining to government why business thinks this way, and a lot of time explaining to business leaders that, government doesn't always make sense, but here's how it works, and here's how we work together. And that's what we've been doing for 102 years now. It's not easy, but it's paid off. I mean, it's paid dividends. I'll tell you a funny story. We celebrated our 100th anniversary at the Chamber 2 years ago. So we did all this research about the Chamber. We found, where we were incorporated and who the first members were and all this great stuff. And in our second year, we did this study. We went in and asked people all over Georgia, what should we do to create jobs? And one of the things that came back is that we ought to be a location for the movie industry, which at the time had just started. They were making silent movies. And so the Georgia Chamber actually took a group of people to Los Angeles to meet with producers at the time to tell them that Georgia was the best place to come shoot these movies. And they completely ignored us. And so the Georgia Chamber came back and we actually made a movie. We created our own movie and we debuted it at the Fox Theater downtown, and the critics said it was quite possibly the worst movie that was ever made in at the time, which was not long, obviously, but it was a really bad movie. But it said but the good thing about it is it really showed the beauty of Georgia. And so, you know, it took us 100 years from that original idea about we ought to be a place for business movies till now we're the #1 place in the country. So if nothing else in Georgia, we stick to it. We got something in our mind, we're going to stick to it for 100 years until it pays off. But we knew it 100 years ago. It just took the movie industry a little while to discover us and figure it out.
Love it. So, I love it. So efficiency, affordability, and the people, you know, are really what make our state stand out. And I'm so thankful to be a part of it and have this time here with you. We didn't talk about this in the briefing before we filmed. And so if you don't feel comfortable going down this path, totally fine. But you mentioned faith a little bit and prayer a little bit. And so if you would like to expand on how your faith has kind of made an impact in your life, you know.
Sure. No, listen, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, you know, the same church my mother and father got married in, the same church my mother went to, and her daddy was a deacon in. My dad's still a deacon there to now. You know, we call and talk on we do FaceTime every Sunday night, and it's funny, you know, this week he did this, and this, but he also fixed the toilet at the church, and he changed the locks on the church, and it's whatever you have to be done. So I grew up in that environment, and that's a very important part of what we go to a church now, Dogwood Church in Peachtree City, and I'm part of our Real Life Ministry, which is a thrift store, food bank. We offer classes. And so that's just part of who we are, my wife and our son. It's critical, but it goes back to that servant leadership, right? It's what we were taught in Sunday school as little kids, that you serve others and you lead best when you serve first. And so it's whatever, you know, whatever the need is. If it was keeping kids in the nursery, which we did for years and years, to being on this mission board, it's just part of who we are. And I think it's important. I think it's funny, my wife is from Indiana, and she grew up very differently. I just assume everyone has a faith background, whether it's Christian or it's Jewish or it's Hindu or something. I just assume everybody has faith. But I've learned in being married to her that not everybody she grew up with grew up in that manner. Yeah. And so I think it's something we take for granted, but I do think that it kind of permeates who we are in the state. And I think it's one of the reasons Georgia, unlike many other southern states, we had a different role through segregation. You know, Atlanta led at that time. You know, we led to bringing people together. And I see that in communities now. Macon has a great example of a community that's really has a kind of split right down the middle racially, but it's the pastors in that community that have brought everybody together, that can get things accomplished. And that's why I really encourage business leaders and civic organizations and local chambers of commerce to reach out to your pastors. Reach out to those folks, bring them in, because a lot of the issues that we talk about, like poverty, you know, business might not be the best group to fix that issue, but partnering with the faith community, you can. That's what we do at our Real Life Center. I mean, we're there, you know, supporting families, helping them out, and most of them are because they've lost a job. But we also give them job training, and we bring in businesses to teach them how to take interviews. It's all part of the partnership. It's part of being a community. And I think a lot of times, if you read the press too much, you see things out there, it makes business look like the bad guy or the faith community look like the bad guy. The truth is, sometimes we're the only ones getting stuff done. Yeah. And when they work together, I really think you find a lot of success. Absolutely. Chris Clark, it has been an honor to have you here and be able to help tell your story. And just want to say thank you for all you have done and all you'll continue to do. Thank you for having me, and thanks for doing this.